The rain came without warning that October evening, the kind that transforms city streets into rivers of reflected light and makes the world smell like wet asphalt and possibility. Daniel Harper stood behind the counter of Brew and Pages, his coffee shop bookstore hybrid. Watching water stream down the front windows in sheets that blur the outside world into impressionistic streaks of color, it was nearly closing. Time 8:45 on a Thursday, and the last customer had left 20 minutes ago, abandoning a half-finished cappuccino and a dog-eared paperback on the corner table. Daniel had been meaning to clear it, but something about the evening made him want to move slowly. To exist in the quiet space between the day's demands and the night's solitude. He was 32 now. Though sometimes he still felt like that uncertain college kid who'd opened his heart to wide and paid the price. The shop had been his sanctuary for the past 5 years, a dream he'd built from nothing after his corporate job had left him hollow. Here, surrounded by the scent of fresh ground coffee and aging paper, he'd learned to be alone without being lonely. Mostly the bell above the door chimed, breaking his reverie. Daniel looked up, ready to apologize that they were closing, but the words died in his throat. Standing in the doorway, rain-soaked and breathing hard as if he'd been running, was Ethan Cole. 10 years. It had been 10 years since Daniel had last seen that face, older now, sharper in the cheekbones, with fine lines around those storm-gray eyes that had once known every secret Daniel possessed. Ethan's dark hair was plastered to his forehead, water dripping from the ends, and he wore an expensive charcoal coat that clung to his frame. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows and Daniel's heart hammering against his ribs. Daniel. Ethan's voice was exactly as he remembered it, low, textured with that slight rasp that used to make Daniel's name sound like a prayer. "We're closing," Daniel heard himself say. The words automatic, shield against the flood of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Ethan flinched almost imperceptibly. "I know. I saw the hours on your website. He paused, water pooling at his feet. "I wasn't sure you'd see me if I called first." Daniel's hands gripped the edge of the counter. "So you ambushed me instead?" That wasn't. Ethan stopped, running a hand through his wet hair in a gesture so familiar it physically hurt. "You're right. I'm sorry. I can go." He turned toward the door, and something in Daniel's chest cracked. "Wait." Ethan froze, his hand on the door handle. Daniel took a breath, trying to steady himself. "You're soaked. At least let me get you a towel. And coffee if you want it." When Ethan turned back, there was something vulnerable in his expression that Daniel had never seen before. Not even in their most intimate moments all those years ago. "I'd like that." "Thank you." Daniel moved on autopilot, retrieving a clean towel from the back and starting the espresso machine. His hands shook slightly as he measured out the beans' Ethiopian roast. Bright and complex, nothing like the simple house blend he'd make for a stranger. He wasn't sure why he was reaching for the good stuff, only that some part of him needed to give Ethan something beautiful. "You built something amazing here," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the shop. He'd shed his wet coat and was toweling off his hair, revealing a crisp white shirt that had somehow stayed mostly dry. "I've been following your Instagram." "The photos don't do it justice." Daniel's hand stilled on the portafilter. "You've been following me on Instagram?" "For 2 years?" Ethan's admission hung in the air between them. "I know I have no right to. Why are you here, Ethan?" The question cut through the pleasantries like a blade. Daniel turned to face him fully, the espresso machine hissing softly behind him. He needed to know, needed to understand why, after a decade of silence. Ethan Cole had walked back into his life on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan set down the towel, his fingers flexing and unflexing at his side, a nervous habit he'd had in college. "I'm back in the city. Permanently. I took a position at Morrison Architecture, heading their sustainable design division. Congratulations." Daniel's tone was flat. He turned back to the espresso machine, watching the dark liquid stream into the cup with hypnotic focus. "I came because I owe you an explanation. And an apology. 10 years too late for both. I know." The quiet acceptance in Ethan's voice made Daniel's throat tight. He finished preparing the coffee, a perfectly extracted double shot topped with microfoam. A small heart formed in the crema, purely from muscle memory, and carried it to one of the tables by the window. Ethan followed, settling into the chair across from him with the careful movements of someone approaching something fragile. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain creating a curtain of privacy around them. Ethan wrapped his hands around the cup but didn't drink, just stared into the coffee like it held answers. "Do you remember the last thing you said to me?" Daniel finally asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Every word. Tell me. Daniel, tell me." Ethan looked up and there was pain in his eyes. "I can't do this anymore. I'm not strong enough to be what you need. That's what I said. And then I left." The memory was a wound Daniel thought had healed, but hearing the words again opened it fresh. They'd been standing in the apartment they'd shared during their last year of grad school, Daniel in architecture, Ethan in fine arts. It had been 3 weeks after Ethan's father had found out about them. 2 weeks after his family had threatened to cut him off completely. 1 week after Ethan had started sleeping on the couch and avoiding Daniel's eyes. "You chose them," Daniel said quietly. "Your family's money, their approval. You chose all of that over us." "Yes," Ethan's voice broke slightly. "I did. And I've regretted it every single day since." Daniel wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to the hurt that had fueled him through countless sleepless nights and empty mornings. But looking at Ethan, now really looking at him, he saw something he'd missed before. There were shadows under those gray eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of years carrying weight. "What happened?" Daniel asked, surprising himself with the gentleness in his tone. Ethan took a shaky breath. "After I left, I did exactly what they wanted. Worked at my father's firm, dated the women they approved of, played the dutiful son. I built buildings I didn't believe in for people who didn't care about beauty, only profit. I became hollow." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. 3 years ago, my mother died. Breast cancer. And at her funeral, my father pulled me aside and told me he was proud of the man I'd become. That's what you wanted, wasn't it? I thought so. But standing there in that church, listening to people talk about legacy and family values, all I could think was that I'd traded the only real thing I'd ever had for a lie. And my mother died never knowing who I really was. Ethan's voice cracked. "I never got to tell her about you. About us. About the fact that the happiest I'd ever been was waking up next to you in that cramped apartment with the broken radiator." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. "Ethan, I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that leaving you was the worst mistake of my life, and that you deserved so much better than what I gave you." The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows. In the dim lighting of the coffee shop, Ethan looked both exactly as Daniel remembered and completely transformed the same beautiful features now marked by experience and regret. "I tried to hate you," Daniel admitted. "For years I told myself you were a coward, that you never really loved me. It was easier than accepting that sometimes love isn't enough." "Was it?" Ethan asked. "Love. Was it love for you?" Daniel met his eyes. "You were the love of my life. Past tense. You made sure of that when you walked away." The words landed like physical blows, and Daniel watched Ethan absorb them, his shoulders curving inward slightly. But there was no defensiveness, no argument, just acceptance. "I understand," Ethan said quietly. "Thank you for hearing me out. And for the coffee?" He stood, reaching for his coat. "Wait," Daniel said again, that same instinct pulling at him. "Your coffee. You didn't drink it." Ethan looked down at the untouched cup, then back at Daniel with a sad smile. "Some things are too perfect to consume. Better to just appreciate them while you can." He was halfway to the door when Daniel spoke again. "Are you out now? To your family?" Ethan turned, something like hope flickering across his features. "My father disowned me 2 years ago when I told him I was gay. Haven't spoken to him since. My sister still calls sometimes. She's trying to understand." That must have been hard. It was liberating. Ethan's smile was more genuine now. Turns out being broke and honest is better than being rich and miserable. Who knew? Despite everything, Daniel felt his lips quirk. "You're not broke. You just said you're heading a division at Morrison. Okay, moderately comfortable and honest. The point stands. They stood there, separated by the length of the coffee shop, but connected by 1,000 unspoken memories. Outside, the rain had nearly stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and glistening. I'm here for a while, Ethan said carefully. In the city, I mean, if you ever wanted to. I don't know, talk or not talk. I'd like to know who you are now, Daniel, even if it's just as friends. Friends. The word felt simultaneously too small and too large for what they'd been. What they'd lost, what they might possibly become. I don't know if I can do that, Daniel admitted. I understand, but Daniel hesitated, fighting against every self-protective instinct he'd built over the past decade. Come back tomorrow. 7 p.m., I'll make you dinner. Ethan's eyes widened. Daniel, you don't have to, I know. But I want to. I'm not promising anything except a meal and conversation. Can you accept that? Yes. The word came out fierce, grateful. Yes, absolutely. After Ethan left, Daniel stood alone in his coffee shop, surrounded by books and the fading scent of rain. His hands were shaking, his heart was racing, and he had no idea what he was doing or why he'd just invited his ex-boyfriend, the man who'd broken him 10 years ago, to dinner. But as he locked up and headed to his apartment above the shop, Daniel realized something. For the first time in years, he felt fully awake. Scared, yes. Vulnerable. Absolutely. But alive in a way he'd almost forgotten was possible. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the night sky clear and scattered with stars. Daniel looked up at them, remembering a night in college when he and Ethan had lain on the roof of their building, mapping constellations and dreaming about the future they'd build together. What am I doing? He whispered to the stars. They offered no answers, only their ancient, patient light. And perhaps, Daniel thought, that was enough. Daniel had changed his mind. About dinner 17 times by Friday afternoon, he stood in his small apartment kitchen, really just an alcove off his living room with barely enough space for one person to cook, staring at the ingredients he'd impulsively bought at the farmer's market that morning. Fresh pasta, heirloom tomatoes, basil that smelled like summer concentrated into leaves, a good bottle of wine he definitely couldn't afford. His best friend Maya's voice echoed in his head from their phone call an hour earlier. You invited your disaster ex to dinner? The one who ghosted you for a decade? Danny, baby, I love you, but have you lost your entire mind? Maybe he had. Probably he had, but he kept thinking about the look in Ethan's eyes last night, that raw vulnerability. The weight of years visible in every line of his face. And he kept thinking about the question that had haunted him through 10 years of moving on. What if? What if Ethan had been strong enough back then? What if circumstances had been different? What if the person standing in his coffee shop last night was someone capable of the courage he'd lacked at 22? Daniel checked his phone. 6:30. Ethan would be here in 30 minutes. He took a shower, changed clothes 3 times, and finally settled on dark jeans and a soft burgundy sweater that Maya had once told him made his brown eyes look warm. Not that he was trying to look good for Ethan. This was just dinner. Just 2 people who used to know each other, sharing a meal and catching up. Sure, Daniel. Keep telling yourself that. At exactly 7 p.m., there was a knock at his door. Daniel took a deep breath, smoothed down his sweater, and opened it. Ethan stood in the hallway holding a bouquet of sunflowers and looking nervous. He wore dark slacks and a deep blue button-down that made his gray eyes look almost silver. His hair was styled, his jaw freshly shaved, and there was a hesitance in his posture that made him seem younger somehow. Hi, Ethan said softly. These are for you. I remembered you used to love sunflowers because they always faced the light, even on cloudy days. Daniel's breath caught. He had loved sunflowers. He'd told Ethan that on one of their first dates. At a botanical garden where they'd wandered, for hours pretending to study plant species while really just finding excuses to touch hands and steal kisses behind the greenhouse. The fact that Ethan remembered, after all these years, felt significant. in a way Daniel wasn't ready to examine. "Thank you," Daniel managed, taking the flowers. "Come in." His apartment was small, but carefully curated built-in bookshelves covering one wall, a worn leather couch facing a brick fireplace, plants thriving in every corner that caught light, a gallery wall of local art mixed with his own photographs from travels he'd taken alone over the years: Iceland's glaciers, Japan's temples, the lavender fields of Provence. Ethan moved through the space slowly, taking everything in with the careful attention Daniel remembered. He'd always looked at things like that, whether buildings or paintings or people, like he was trying to understand their essential truth. "Your home is beautiful," Ethan said, pausing at a photograph of Daniel standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, his hair wild in the wind, laughing at something off camera. "Where was this?" "Big Sur, 3 years ago. Solo trip to clear my head." Ethan studied the photo a moment longer before turning to face him. "You look happy." "I am." Daniel set the sunflowers on the counter, reaching for a vase. "I've built a good life, Ethan. It took time, but I learned how to be okay on my own. I can see that." There was no jealousy in Ethan's tone, only quiet admiration. "I'm glad. You deserve happiness." They stood there for a moment, the weight of history pressing against the boundaries of the present. Then Daniel cleared his throat and gestured to the kitchen. "I hope you still eat pasta. I made my grandmother's recipe, the one I told you about." Ethan's face lit up with recognition. "The one with the secret ingredient you refused to tell me? That's the one. And the secret stays secret. Even now. Especially now. A man has to maintain some mystery." The tension broke slightly, and they both smiled. Careful, tentative smiles, but real nonetheless. Daniel moved into the kitchen, and Ethan followed, leaning against the counter in a way that was both familiar and strange. Ethan asked, "You can open the wine?" "Corkscrews in that drawer." They moved around each other with surprising ease, Daniel finishing the sauce while Ethan poured wine into mismatched glasses, one from a thrift store, one stolen from a hotel in Prague. It was almost like before, when they'd cooked together in their tiny student kitchen, bumping hips and stealing tastes and turning simple meals into hours-long affairs, except it wasn't like before at all. They were different people now, carrying different scars. "So," Daniel said as he plated the pasta, "tell me about your work. Sustainable design?" Ethan's whole demeanor shifted, excitement breaking through his careful composure. "It's incredible. Danny, we're reimagining how buildings can exist in harmony with their environment instead of dominating it. Green roofs, passive solar design, materials that actually give back to the ecosystem." He caught himself sheepish. "Sorry, I tend to ramble about this stuff. Don't apologize. I like seeing you passionate about something." They carried their plates to the small dining table by the window. The city lights sparkled below them, and Daniel lit 2 candles purely for ambience. Not romance, he told himself. The first bite of pasta seemed to transport Ethan somewhere else. He closed his eyes, a soft sound of pleasure escaping his lips that did absolutely nothing to Daniel's equilibrium. "This is exactly how I remembered it," Ethan said, opening his eyes. "God, I've missed your cooking." "That's what you missed?" "My cooking?" The question came out more pointed than Daniel intended. Ethan set down his fork, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. "I missed everything about you. Your cooking, your laugh, the way you'd gesture wildly when you talked about books you loved, the way you'd wake up before dawn just to watch the sunrise. How you made me feel like I was someone worth knowing." He paused. "I missed the person I was when I was with you." Daniel's throat tightened. "Who were you when you were with me?" "Real, brave, myself." Ethan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Without you, I forgot how to be any of those things." "That's not fair," Daniel said quietly. "You can't put that on me. Being yourself, that has to come from inside. I can't give you that." "No, you're right." Ethan looked down at his plate. "I'm saying this all wrong. What I mean is, you showed me it was possible to live authentically. And when I chose fear over love, I didn't just lose you. I lost myself too." They ate in silence for a while, the weight of Ethan's words settling between them. Daniel wanted to stay guarded, wanted to protect the life he'd so carefully built. But sitting across from Ethan in the candlelight, watching him savor each bite of food with that same appreciation he'd once brought to everything they shared, Daniel felt his defenses beginning to crack. "What made you finally come out?" Daniel asked. "To your father, I mean?" Ethan set down his wine glass, his expression growing distant. "I met someone." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Of course. Of course there had been someone else. 10 years was a long time. Oh, was all Daniel could manage. "His name was Marcus," Ethan continued, not seeming to notice Daniel's reaction. "He was a colleague at my father's firm. Funny, kind, completely out, and unapologetic about it. We became friends, and eventually, more. Nothing serious, but enough that I couldn't keep lying to myself." He paused, his jaw tightening. "When my father found out, he didn't just fire Marcus, he blacklisted him in the industry. Made sure he couldn't get another architecture job in the city." Jesus, Ethan. "Marcus moved to Portland. Last I heard, he's happy. Running his own sustainable design studio. Actually, we email sometimes." Ethan's hands clenched on the table. "But watching my father destroy someone's career just because that person had the audacity to care about me, I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be complicit in that kind of cruelty. So you came out." "So I came out. Told him exactly who I was and who I'd always been. Told him about you, about how much I loved you, and how much I regretted letting him make me into a coward." Ethan's smile was bitter. "He told me I was dead to him. Haven't spoken since." Daniel reached across the table instinctively, covering Ethan's hand with his own. "I'm sorry. I know how much your family meant to you." Ethan's eyes widened slightly at the touch, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand over, palm up, and laced his fingers through Daniel's. The contact sent electricity up Daniel's arm muscle memory, mixed with something new. Something that acknowledged all the years and changes between them. "They weren't really my family if they couldn't love all of me," Ethan said. "I understand that now. Family is supposed to be the people who see you completely and choose you anyway. Like Maya," Daniel said softly, "my best friend. She's been my family for years. I'd like to meet her. If this goes anywhere." Daniel pulled his hand back gently. "Ethan, I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm doing here." "I don't either," Ethan admitted. "But being here with you feels right, in a way nothing has felt right in years." They finished dinner with the conversation flowing more as allies, talking about Daniel's bookshop. Ethan's favorite projects, the changes in the city, carefully skirting around the deeper emotions churning beneath the surface. When the plates were empty and the wine bottle drained, they moved to the couch with coffee, sitting at opposite ends, like boxers in neutral corners. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said, cradling his mug. "'Kay. Has there been anyone serious for you?" Since Daniel had been expecting this question, but it still stung. "A few relationships. Nothing that lasted more than a year. Turns out I have trust issues." He tried to keep his tone light, but it came out edged. "Funny how that happens when someone you love abandons you." Ethan winced. "I deserve that." "You do." Daniel sighed. "But it's not all on you. I have my own work to do, my own patterns to break." "What patterns?" "I choose people who are emotionally unavailable. Keep them at arm's length. End things before they can end me." Daniel looked directly at Ethan. "Therapist says, I'm afraid of being vulnerable because vulnerability means someone can hurt me." "You're in therapy?" 5 years now. Best decision I ever made." Daniel smiled slightly. "She'd probably tell me having you here is either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Which do you think it is?" "I honestly don't know." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to the city sounds filtering through the window sirens in the distance. Laughter from the street below, the rumble of the subway passing underneath. Ethan said eventually, though he made no move to stand, "It's late. It's 9:30. Right. I don't want to overstay my welcome." Daniel looked at him, at the uncertainty in those gray eyes, the careful way he held himself, the visible effort it took not to reach across the space between them. This was a different Ethan from the one who'd left him. Humbled, honest, present in a way the younger version had never quite managed to be. "You're not," Daniel said quietly. "Overstaying, I mean." Hope bloomed across Ethan's features, fragile and tentative. "No, no. But Ethan." Daniel set down his mug. "I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. I don't trust easily anymore. And I can't be someone's experiment or redemption arc. That's not what this is, isn't it? You come back after all this time, finally ready to live your truth, and the first thing you do is look me up? How do I know you're not just trying to recapture something from the past because it feels safe and familiar?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his own mug and moved closer, not touching, but near enough that Daniel could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "You're right to ask that," Ethan said. "And I can't prove my intentions with words. All I can say is that I didn't come back to the city because of you. I came because it was the right move for my career. But when I got here, when I had the chance to see you again, I could not take it. Not because you're familiar, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be braver than I am. I can't be your courage, Ethan. You have to find that yourself." "I know. I have. These past 2 years, coming out, rebuilding my life on my own terms. I did that. But wanting to share that life with you? That's not weakness. That's hope." Daniel felt his resolve wavering. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was a mistake, that he was setting himself up for heartbreak all over again. But his heart, his stubborn, hopeful heart, remembered what it felt like to love this man, and wondered what it might feel like to love the person he'd become. "I need time," Daniel finally said. "I need to think about whether I can do this." "Whether we can do this, I'll give you all the time you need," Ethan promised. "Days, weeks, months, whatever it takes. I've already waited 10 years. I can wait longer. What if the answer is no?" Pain flickered across Ethan's face, but his voice remained steady. "Then I'll accept it and be grateful for these 2 evenings, for getting to see who you've become, for the best pasta I've ever had." He smiled sadly. "And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I had a second chance and respected whatever decision you made." They walked to the door together, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Ethan pulled on his coat, and Daniel found himself memorizing details, the way the collar framed his jaw, the slight tremor in his hands as he buttoned it, the way he looked at Daniel like he was something precious and breakable. "Thank you for tonight," Ethan said. "For listening, for sharing your home and your food and your time. Thank you for the sunflowers, and for being honest." They stood there, inches apart, and Daniel felt the pull of old gravity mixed with new possibility. It would be so easy to close the distance, to kiss him, to let physical comfort override emotional caution. But easy wasn't always right. "Good night, Ethan," Daniel said softly. "Good night, Daniel." After Ethan left, Daniel stood with his back against the closed door, his heart racing and his mind spinning. The apartment smelled like pasta and wine and Ethan's colon sampling, woody and clean, that Daniel didn't recognize, but somehow suited him perfectly. On the table, the sunflowers glowed golden in the candlelight. Their faces turned toward even this small source of brightness. Always seeking the light, Daniel thought. Even when it's barely there, he pulled out his phone and texted Maya. "Okay, so maybe I haven't completely lost my mind. Maybe just partially." Her response was immediate. "That's my boy." Partial insanity is practically sanity. How was it? Daniel looked around his apartment, at the dishes in the sink, the wine glasses on the coffee table, the flowers that shouldn't mean as much as they did. He thought about Ethan's hands, his honesty, the weight of his regrets, and the lightness of his hope. "Complicated," he typed back. "He's different. I'm different. Everything's different. But," Daniel smiled despite himself, "but maybe different isn't bad. Maybe it's just new. Are you seeing him again?" "I don't know yet. I told him I need time to think smart. Proud of you. Also, I'm coming over tomorrow with wine, and we're analyzing every single detail of this dinner. Prepare yourself. Wouldn't have it any other way." Daniel set down his phone and moved to the window. Looking out at the city lights, somewhere out there, Ethan was heading home to his own apartment, his own thoughts, his own hopes and fears. 10 years ago, they'd been different people in a different world. That relationship had ended and it needed to end. But this, whatever this was, wasn't that relationship resurrected. It was something entirely new. Built on the foundation of who they'd become separately, the question was whether that foundation was strong enough to support what they might build together. Daniel didn't have the answer yet. But for the first time in a long time, he was willing to ask the question. And maybe, he thought, that was enough for now. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange suspension of time. Ethan didn't call or text, respecting Daniel's request for space. But his presence lingered in Daniel's life like a ghost made of memories and possibilities. Daniel threw himself into work, expanding the shop's events schedule, author readings, poetry slams, Sunday morning coffee tastings. He told himself he was simply being a good business owner, but Maya saw through him immediately. "You're running," she said bluntly, sitting across from him at their usual Wednesday lunch spot. Maya Chen was a force of nature, corporate lawyer, who'd left her firm to start a non-profit defending LGBTQ+ rights. All sharp edges and fiercer loyalty. She'd been Daniel's roommate in grad school, his shoulder to cry on when Ethan left, his family of choice ever since. "I'm not running," Daniel protested. "I'm processing. You're avoiding. There's a difference." She stabbed at her salad with unnecessary force. "Danny, you told him you needed time to think. It's been 2 weeks. Have you actually thought about it? Or have you just been aggressively alphabetizing your poetry section?" Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was right. He'd reorganized 3 sections of the bookstore, deep-cleaned his apartment twice, and taken up running at 6 a.m. and Ethan to avoid sitting with his feelings about Ethan. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. Maya's expression softened immediately. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know, honey. And you have every right to be. He hurt you badly. He destroyed me, Maya. For months after he left, I could barely function. Do you remember? I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I'd wake up reaching for him and find empty space." "Ah!" Daniel's throat tightened at the memory. "It took me years to put myself back together. What if I let him in again, and he breaks me worse this time? What if he doesn't? That's scarier somehow. Because if this works, if we actually build something real, I'll have to face the fact that we could have had this all along if he'd just been brave enough." Maya squeezed his hand. "That's not fair to either of you. You were both kids back then, dealing with impossible situations. He made a terrible choice, yes, but you can't build a future by punishing him for the past." "I'm not trying to punish him, aren't you? By not even giving him a chance to show you who he is now?" Daniel pulled his hand back, frustrated. "Whose side are you on?" "Yours. Always yours." Maya's voice was firm. "Which is why I'm telling you that hiding from this isn't protecting you, it's just another way of being hurt by it. At least if you try, and it doesn't work out, you'll know. But if you don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering." They finished lunch with the conversation drifting to safer topics. But Maya's words stayed with Daniel as he walked back to the shop. The afternoon passed in the usual rhythm of customers and coffee. But his mind was elsewhere. Around 4 p.m., the bell chimed and Daniel looked up from the register, ready with his customer service smile. It froze on his face. It wasn't Ethan, it was Ethan's younger sister. Charlotte. Daniel hadn't seen her since college, but he recognized her immediately. She had the same gray eyes as Ethan, the same sharp cheekbones. But where Ethan's features were angular and severe, Charlotte's were softer, more open. She wore a tailored pantsuit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd fought hard for her place in the world. "Hi, Daniel," she said, approaching the counter with tentative steps. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me, Charlotte." "Of course I remember you." Daniel's mind raced. "Does Ethan know you're here?" "God, no. He'd probably kill me if he knew I'd come." She glanced around the shop, seeming nervous. "Do you have a few minutes?" I promise I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to talk to you about my brother." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't owe the Cole family anything, especially not a conversation. But something in Charlotte's expression, a genuine worry that seemed separate from family loyalty, made him hesitate.
"Okay,"
he said. "Let me grab my assistant to cover the counter." They settled at a corner table with coffee, and for a moment, neither spoke. Charlotte wrapped her hands around her mug, staring into it like Ethan had that first night. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "For how our family treated you. For how I treated you." Daniel blinked, surprised. "You barely knew me." "Exactly. You were this important person in my brother's life, someone who made him happier than I'd ever seen him, and I didn't even try to get to know you. I just went along with what our parents said, that it was a phase that Ethan would grow out of it." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I was a coward too. And I'm sorry, Charlotte. You were what, 19? 20? Old enough to know better. Old enough to stand up for him." She took a shaky breath. "When Ethan came out to our father 2 years ago, I didn't speak up. I sat there in that dining room and listened to Dad say horrible things, and I didn't say a word. And afterward, when Ethan packed his things and left, I let him go without even telling him I loved him." Daniel felt his anger at the Cole family begin to shift, making room for something more complex. "But you're here now." "I'm here now," she confirmed. "It took me 6 months to work up the courage to call him. Another year to really understand what he'd sacrificed by finally being honest. I've been in therapy, working through my own internalized homophobia, trying to be better." She met Daniel's eyes directly. "I'm not asking you to forgive our family or to give Ethan another chance. I just wanted you to know that he didn't come back here on a whim. He's done the work, real work. And he talks about you." She trailed off, emotion thick in her voice. "He talks about me how?" Daniel asked quietly. "Like you're the one that got away. The standard against which everything else in his life is measured and found wanting." Charlotte wiped at her eyes. "He didn't tell me he'd seen you. I figured it out when I noticed he'd been different these past few weeks, lighter somehow, but also more anxious. When I pressed him, he admitted he'd reached out to you. And you're here to what? Convince me to give him a chance? I'm here to tell you that my brother has spent a decade becoming someone worthy of you. Whether that's enough, whether you want to give him that chance, that's entirely up to you. I just thought you should know that the person he is now isn't the person who left you. He's fought hard to change, to grow, to become someone who could be brave enough to love openly." They sat in silence for a moment. Daniel felt the careful walls he'd built beginning to crumble piece by piece. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Of course. Why does it matter to you whether Ethan and I work out? You don't know me." Charlotte smiled sadly. "Because I've watched my brother punish himself for 10 years, and I've watched him build a life that looks successful on the outside, but feels empty to him. The only time I've seen real hope in his eyes was when he talked about reconnecting with you. That has to mean something." After Charlotte left, Daniel stood behind the counter, feeling unmoored. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How's the avoidance going?" Before he could second-guess himself, Daniel found Ethan's number still saved in his phone after all these years. Though he'd told himself 100 times to delete it, Tand typed out a message. "Can we talk? Tomorrow night, my place?" The response came almost immediately. "Yes. What time?" 7. I'll be there." Daniel stared at the exchange, his heart pounding. He was really doing this. Really opening the door to the possibility of hurt and hope in equal measure. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, memories flooding through him unbidden. The good ones hurt almost as much as the bad. Ethan's laugh, deep and unguarded. The way he'd traced patterns on Daniel's skin in the quiet hours before dawn. The morning they'd made pancakes and ended up with batter on the ceiling and each other. Laughing so hard they could barely breathe. But also the bad. Ethan's increasing distance in those final weeks. The way he'd started sleeping with his back to Daniel. The empty look in his eyes when he'd said, "I can't do this anymore." Like he was already half-dash gone. Daniel got up and made tea, sitting by the window and watching the city sleep. Tomorrow night, he'd have to make a decision. Not about whether to forgive Ethan. Forgiveness, he was learning, was a process, not a moment. But about whether he was willing to be vulnerable again. Whether the person he'd become was strong enough to risk being broken. His phone lit up with a message. Ethan, I can't sleep. Keep thinking about tomorrow. I know you said we'd talk, but I don't want to assume what that means. Are you? Is this you giving us a chance? Or saying goodbye properly? Daniel appreciated the honesty, the willingness to acknowledge uncertainty. He typed and deleted 3 responses before finally settling on, I don't know yet. I just know I can't move forward without some answers. And I can't give you those answers without being honest about what I need. I understand. Whatever you need from me, I'll give it. Questions, space, closure, whatever helps. What if what I need is the truth? The whole truth about why you left, not just the sanitized version? There was a long pause. Then you deserve that. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, no matter how much it hurts to say out loud. Okay, try to sleep, Daniel. Tomorrow will be better if we're both clear-headed. You too. Ethan Daniel set down his phone and returned to bed, but sleep remained elusive. Instead, he found himself mentally preparing, not just for tomorrow's conversation, but for the possibility of reopening his heart to someone who'd once shattered it. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel reorganized the same shelf 3 times, burned a batch of coffee, and snapped at a customer who didn't deserve it. By 6 p.m., he gave up pretending to work and went upstairs to his apartment. He'd meant to cook, but the idea of food made him nauseous. Instead, he cleaned obsessively, lit candles, changed his shirt twice, and paced until exactly 7 p.m. when the knock came. Ethan stood in the hallway looking as nervous as Daniel felt. He wore jeans and a simple gray sweater, his hair slightly mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. In his hands, he carried a worn notebook. Hi, Ethan said. Come in. They settled on the couch, the notebook between them like a bridge or a barrier. Daniel couldn't tell which. What's that? Daniel asked, nodding at it. My journal. From back then, Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he touched the cover. I started keeping it junior year. The year we met. I thought, if you want to understand what I was thinking, feeling, going through, it's all in here. The good and the bad and the ugly. Daniel stared at the notebook. This was more than he'd expected. More vulnerability, more trust. You don't have to show me that, he said quietly. I know, but you asked for the whole truth. This is the closest I can get to giving it to you. Ethan opened the journal to a page marked with a faded photograph. Daniel and Ethan at the botanical gardens. Laughing, young, unbearably.